Deep in the mountains of southeastern Turkey, there is a ridge that shouldn't exist. For decades, the Jermis Range was dismissed by experts as a barren wasteland of limestone and dust. But recent excavations have pulled back the earth on a discovery so massive it has shattered our understanding of the ancient world. We've always been told that civilization began with a plow and a grain of wheat. Yet here we find 20-ton megaliths and master-tier engineering appearing nearly 2,000 years before the invention of agriculture. This is a site that defies the laws of historical progression, a ghost in the machine of human history that proves our ancestors were building bigger, earlier, and more sophisticated than we ever thought possible. In 1994, a German archaeologist named Klaus Schmidt stood on a summit overlooking the Heron Plain and realized he was standing on an artificial mountain. While previous surveys dismissed the hill as a medieval cemetery due to the amount of flint and broken limestone on the surface, Schmidt saw the telltale signs of something much older. This wasn't a natural formation, but the tip of a megalithic iceberg that had been intentionally buried by human hands. As the first trenches were cleared, the reality of the site began to sink in. Schmidt uncovered the top of a massive T-shaped pillar, perfectly squared and carved with the precision of a master mason. This was the birth of the Göbekli Tepe excavation, a discovery that would fundamentally contradict the established historical status quo. To understand why this find sent such massive shockwaves through the scientific world, we have to look at the baseline history that has been taught for generations. For over a century, the standard model of human progress was a simple, linear climb. We were told that for hundreds of thousands of years, humans were primitive hunter-gatherers living in small, nomadic bands. According to this theory, everything changed around 10,000 years ago when we supposedly discovered how to domesticate wheat and barley in the Fertile Crescent. This led to permanent settlements, which provided the food surplus necessary to finally build temples and organize complex societies. This bread before beer theory insists that civilization is a byproduct of the farm, assuming you cannot have a cathedral without a bakery to feed the builders. This logical progression was comfortable, but the evidence from the stone hills of Turkey suggests we have been reading the story of our own species in reverse. We believed that the first massive stone monuments like Stonehenge or the Great Pyramids were the culmination of thousands of years of agricultural stability. Under this old model, a group of hunters building a megalithic temple would be like cavemen attempting to construct a space shuttle. It simply was not considered a possibility within the known range of human capability at that time. We were taught that social hierarchy and specialized labor only appeared after people began living in cities. Yet these ruins tell a different story. The moment of truth arrived when the carbon dating results for the lowest levels of the site were finalized. The date was 9,600 BC. To put that into perspective, this was over 11,500 years ago. At this point in history, the world was a fundamentally different place. Britain was still physically connected to mainland Europe by a vast land bridge known as Doggerland, and the woolly mammoth was still a living species. According to almost every textbook, humans during this era were using flint scrapers and living in temporary skin tents. They were supposedly struggling to survive the tail end of a global deep freeze. Yet, the physical evidence proves they were quarrying, transporting, and erecting limestone pillars that weighed as much as 20 tons. This discovery requires more than a minor adjustment to the calendar. We are looking at a society that was carving sophisticated 3D art into hard rock before the invention of the wheel, the discovery of metal, or the birth of farming. The site contains no houses, no trash pits filled with domestic waste, and no signs of agriculture. The people who built this were hunters living off wild gazelle and aurochs, yet they possessed the engineering knowledge to move blocks of stone that would challenge a modern crane. The data suggests that a shared ideology or a massive communal project came before the farm, not as a result of it. The timing of this construction makes the anomaly even more difficult to ignore. 9,600 BC marks the exact conclusion of the Younger Dryas, a period of abrupt and violent climatic shifts. The Earth had been locked in a 1,200-year cold snap before the world suddenly warmed up again. This was a time of global instability and massive ecological upheaval. The decision to build here contradicted what the climate should have allowed. Usually, when the environment is in chaos, humans retreat to the basics of food and shelter. They do not spend decades moving mountains of stone to a high ridge where there is no water and no natural protection. This project suggests these people were driven by something far more powerful than the search for calories. They were building a physical anchor in a world that was literally melting and shifting around them. The scale of the work is staggering. Estimates suggest that to move even a single 10-ton pillar from the nearby quarries would require a coordinated effort of at least 500 people. To feed that many workers for the years it took to build each enclosure requires a level of logistical planning that we did not think humans were capable of for another 5,000 years. They were exiting a global cataclysm and immediately constructing monuments that would remain unmatched in scale and precision until the rise of ancient Egypt. If civilization did not start with a farm, then the entire foundation of our historical understanding is broken. It implies that the beginning of our story happened much earlier, perhaps during the Ice Age itself, and that Göbekli Tepe is not the start of something new, but the final polished echo of a lost world. As we move deeper into the enclosures, the truth becomes even more compelling. We are finding that Göbekli Tepe was part of a larger regional network of hills, each containing its own megalithic secrets. The implications are clear. We are not the first advanced society to walk this earth. We are simply the latest. To understand how they did it, we have to look closer at the physical ruins themselves, starting with the impossible engineering found inside the central chambers. When you walk into the central enclosures of these stone hills, the first thing that hits you is the sheer mathematical improbability of the space. We aren't looking at a simple arrangement of rocks. We're looking at a deliberate, complex architectural system that seems to have appeared out of nowhere. The central pillars in Enclosure D, for example, aren't just stuck in the dirt. They are set into pedestals carved directly out of the living bedrock. The builders weren't just moving heavy objects. They were integrating their structures into the geology of the mountain itself. This requires a level of planning that extends far beyond a seasonal gathering of nomads. It implies a master plan, a blueprint that was followed with clinical precision across generations. The masonry here also doesn't match the tools we previously thought available during the pre-pottery Neolithic. We've always assumed that without metal, humans were limited to crude, subtractive methods. But the high-relief carvings found on these pillars suggest a much more sophisticated process. Take Pillar 27. It features a predator, likely a leopard, leaping down the side of the stone. This wasn't scratched onto the surface. The artist removed centimeters of the surrounding limestone to leave the animal protruding in 3 dimensions. This is a subtractive technique that requires an incredible amount of patience and foresight. If you make a single mistake with a stone hammer, the entire piece is ruined. The fact that we see this level of artistry across dozens of pillars suggests that these people had moved past the trial and error phase of masonry thousands of years earlier. Beyond the art, there is a chemical anomaly hidden underfoot. In several of the enclosures, the floors are made of a material known as terrazzo. This is a composite made of burnt lime and crushed limestone. To produce burnt lime, you have to heat limestone to temperatures exceeding 800 degrees Celsius for several days. This isn't something that happens by accident in a campfire. It requires a dedicated kiln and a constant, high-energy fuel source. The result is a water-resistant, durable floor that looks almost like modern concrete. The decision to use this specific material suggests that the builders weren't just concerned with the look of the temple. They were focused on its longevity and its ability to withstand the elements. It's a piece of chemical engineering that wouldn't be seen again at this scale until the Roman Empire. The pillars themselves are another engineering headache. Some stand nearly 18 feet tall and weigh upwards of 20 tons. In a world without pulley systems or beasts of burden, the logistics of moving these blocks from the nearby quarries, some hundreds of meters away, is a massive undertaking. We often hear the explanation of ropes and rollers, But that theory starts to fall apart when you consider the terrain. The site is located on a steep, rocky ridge. Moving a 20-ton slab up a limestone incline requires a level of coordinated labor and mechanical leverage that we simply don't associate with hunter-gatherer societies. It requires a specialized class of engineers who understood weight distribution and physics long before those concepts were ever codified into books. The sheer scale of the stone removal is another point that is often overlooked. To create the enclosures, the builders had to quarry out thousands of cubic meters of limestone. We can still see the negative imprints in the surrounding plateaus where these pillars were birthed. They weren't just picking up loose rocks, they were mining the mountain. Some of the unfinished pillars still sitting in the quarry are even larger than those in the temples, with one measuring nearly 24 feet in length. The decision to abandon these giants mid-carve suggests a sudden shift in priorities, or perhaps a realization that even their advanced techniques had a physical limit. What makes this architecture so anomalous is the lack of a learning curve in the stratigraphic record. Usually, when we look at the history of a site, we see a progression from simple to complex. We expect to see crude, small stones at the bottom and larger, more polished work at the top as the culture matures. At these stone hills, the opposite is true. The oldest enclosures, the ones buried deepest, are the largest and most sophisticated. The masonry is finer, the pillars are bigger, and the artistic detail is more refined. As we move up into the later layers, the quality actually begins to degrade. The pillars get smaller, the enclosures become more rectangular, and the carvings lose their three-dimensional depth. It's as if the culture arrived at the site with their highest level of knowledge already intact, and then slowly lost the ability to maintain it over the following 2,000 years. This regression is a massive red flag for historians. It suggests that Göbekli Tepe wasn't the cradle of civilization, but rather a peak or a final stand for a culture that was already in decline. It implies that the true origin of this architectural style lies even further back in time, hidden in a layer of history that we haven't uncovered yet. If they didn't learn these skills on this ridge, then where did they come from? The precision of the stone joints and the chemical complexity of the floors point toward a tradition of masonry that must have taken thousands of years to develop. We are looking at the finished product, but the factory is missing. The enclosures also feature astronomical alignments that suggest a deep understanding of the cosmos. Several researchers have pointed out that the central pillars seem to be oriented towards specific star systems, such as Sirius or the constellation of Orion. While this is still a subject of debate among mainstream archaeologists, the mathematical probability of these pillars aligning with major celestial events by pure chance is remarkably low. If these sites were intended as observatories, it adds another layer of specialized knowledge to the builder's repertoire. Not only were they master masons and chemists, but they were also astronomers who were tracking the movement of the heavens with scientific rigor. The decision to build here contradicted what the climate should have allowed. As the world was exiting the younger dryus, resources were scarce and the weather was unpredictable. Yet, the investment in these structures was total. They weren't building shelters for people, they were building monuments for ideas. The enclosures are intentionally semi-subterranean, carved into the slope of the hill, which would have made them incredibly difficult to excavate, but very stable once completed. Every choice made by the builders, from the choice of stone to the orientation of the pillars, reflects a high level of intentionality. This wasn't a project born of necessity, it was a project born of a specific, complex vision that we are only just beginning to decode. As we look at the sheer physical mass of these structures, it becomes impossible to categorize the builders as simple hunters. They were a society that had mastered the art of shaping the world to fit their beliefs. They understood the properties of stone, the mechanics of weight, and the chemistry of the earth. But as we expand our gaze beyond this single ridge, we find that they weren't alone. For years after its discovery, the scientific community treated Göbekli Tepe as a singular anomaly. It was framed as an isolated miracle of history, a lone temple built by a freakishly talented group of hunters who vanished as quickly as they appeared. But that narrative changed in 2021 with the formal launch of the Taş Tepeler project. This massive archaeological survey revealed that the stone hills were not a single point of interest, but a vast interconnected network of at least 12 different sites scattered across the Harran Plain. We are no longer looking at one temple. We are looking at a regional civilization that operated with a unified architectural and symbolic language. Sites like Karahan Tepe, Harbetsuvan, and Sefer Tepe prove that this was a coordinated, industrial-scale effort to reshape the landscape of Anatolia. The realization that Göbekli Tepe was just one gear in a larger machine fundamentally shifts our understanding of the pre-pottery Neolithic. This wasn't the work of a few rogue bands of hunters. A network this size requires a massive, sustained population and a sophisticated logistical web to move resources and people between these tepe sites. Each location seems to have served a specific purpose, creating a geography of the sacred that spanned hundreds of square miles. This regional focus suggests a level of territorial control and social complexity that we previously thought was reserved for the great empires of the Bronze Age. The Stone Hills were a heartland of human activity at a time when the rest of the world was supposedly silent. Perhaps the most striking evidence of this coordinated society is found at Karahan Tepe. Located about 23 miles east of Göbekli Tepe, this site features similar T-shaped pillars, but the architecture takes a darker, more theatrical turn. Archaeologists uncovered a specialized chamber carved directly into the bedrock, now famously known as the Chamber of the Phallus. Inside, 11 standing pillars are shaped like phalluses, surrounding a larger, more imposing central stone. Carved into the wall of this chamber is a human head with a serpentine neck, staring directly into the space. This wasn't a room for gathering, it was a room for an experience. The layout of Karahan Tepe reveals a processional design that is unsettlingly deliberate. The architecture was engineered to channel people through specific stone narrowings, forcing them to move in a predetermined path before entering the ritual chambers. This implies a highly organized, ritualistic society with a strict sense of hierarchy and ceremony. You didn't just walk into these spaces, you were led. The Chamber of the Phallus even features a channel for liquid, suggesting that rituals involving water, blood, or some other substance were central to the experience. This level of theatrical engineering shows that these people were masters of psychological space, using stone to dictate human behavior 10,000 years before the first cathedrals were built. In 2021, the narrative changed again with a discovery at Saburs. Excavators uncovered a narrative relief carved into the back wall of a communal building, depicting a central male figure flanked by two leopards. To his left, another scene shows a man facing a bull with its horns lowered. This is a cinematic sequence frozen in limestone, dated to approximately 9000 BC. Unlike the isolated symbols found at other sites, these figures are interacting in a clear, sequential story. The central figure is carved in high relief, shown grasping his own phallus, a recurring motif of vitality and lineage found throughout the stone hills. The leopards are shown in profile with their mouths open and teeth bared, creating a sense of tension and physical threat. The anatomical accuracy and the use of the stone's depth to create a sense of perspective suggests that by this point, the artistic tradition was already mature. This isn't the beginning of an art form. It is a refined execution of an established style. The Saburs discovery proves that the Taş Tepeler sites weren't just functional or ritual spaces. They were repositories for a complex, shared mythology. This was a civilization that used the bedrock of the Harran Plain to record specific narratives that were meant to be permanent. By mapping these stories across all 12 sites, we see a consistent symbolic language. They were using high-relief masonry to document a worldview that survived for thousands of years, long after the people who carved them had disappeared. But to truly understand the people who inhabited these stone hills, we have to look past the art and the architecture and confront the brutal reality of how they actually survived on this ridge. Building a monument is one thing. Keeping the builders alive in a desert is another entirely. When we look at the logistics of the stone hills, the math behind the labor force creates a massive scientific headache. To quarry, move, and erect a single 20-ton pillar, you need more than just a few strong hands. You need a coordinated team of hundreds. Conservative estimates suggest that at any given time, thousands of people were involved in the construction and maintenance of these sites. This raises a fundamental caloric question. How were these people fed? In 9600 BC, there were no grain silos, no domesticated cattle, and no organized agriculture to provide a steady food supply. The discovery of tens of thousands of animal bones, primarily wild gazelle and aurochs, suggests a massive, industrial-scale hunting effort. This wasn't casual foraging. It was a highly organized catering operation that functioned like a military supply chain to keep a massive workforce active on a waterless ridge. The sheer volume of meat required to sustain such a population implies that the builders were not just hunters, but master tacticians of the landscape. They would have needed to coordinate large-scale drives, perhaps funneling entire herds into traps to provide the surplus needed for the workers. This creates a caloric crisis for the standard historical model. We are seeing a society with the logistical complexity of an agricultural civilization, but without the actual agriculture. It suggests that a high level of social organization, the kind that allows for specialized labor and massive communal projects, didn't actually require farming to exist. The builders of the stone hills proved that a shared ideology could organize a population just as effectively as a wheat field. Perhaps the most unsettling anomaly found at these sites is the direction of their technological progress. We are taught that human skill follows a linear path from simple to complex, yet the stratigraphic record in Turkey tells the opposite story. At Göbekli Tepe, the oldest enclosures, the ones buried deepest in the hill, are the largest and most sophisticated. These Layer 3 structures feature the most massive pillars and the highest quality 3D carvings. As we move up into the later layers, the quality begins to noticeably decline. The pillars in the younger enclosures are smaller, the masonry is cruder, and the artistic detail becomes flat and abstract. The knowledge was not growing, it was being lost. This skill regression is a massive red flag for researchers. It contradicts the idea that these people were learning as they went. Instead, it appears they arrived at the site with their highest level of knowledge already intact, only for that knowledge to slowly degrade over the following 2,000 years. This suggests that the stone hills were not the birthplace of this architectural style, but rather the final peak of a much older tradition that is yet to be found. If the builders were losing their grip on their own technology, as time went on, it implies we are looking at the survivors of a more advanced era trying to preserve what they had left, rather than a primitive culture inventing something new. The final mystery of the stone hills is not how they were built, but how they were abandoned. These sites were not destroyed by an invading army or leveled by an earthquake. Instead, they were meticulously and intentionally buried. Evidence shows that hundreds of tons of clean fill, consisting of limestone rubble and bone, were brought in to cover the enclosures from top to bottom. This backfilling process was a massive engineering project in its own right, requiring almost as much effort as the original construction. The builders were effectively turning their temples into artificial hills, sealing them away from the world with a level of care that suggests they wanted these structures to remain untouched for eternity. The question of why they chose to bury their greatest achievements remains one of the most debated topics in archaeology. Some suggest the sites were retired as part of a ritual cycle, while others believe they were being hidden from a perceived threat or a changing world. By burying the enclosures, the people of the stone hills ensured that their work would survive the elements for over 10,000 years. They created a megalithic mystery that waited in total darkness until Klaus Schmidt finally pulled back the dirt in 1994.